Well, I have a door on stage because we're going to talk about doors and what the Bible has to say about doors and the doors that we walk through. Matt Hammett is not just a musician, but he's now a speaker, and he talks about issues that men and women deal with. And he was our man camp, our men's retreat speaker, and one of the nuggets that he shared with us was about the front door. And he talked about how in Joshua chapter 4, the people of Israel have crossed the Jordan River, and now they're home. They're in their promised land. And then Joshua says, take 12 large stones and set them up. They're called stones of remembrance, or masebas. And these stones would be a reminder for generations of what God did. They would also remind you when you walk past them who you are as a man or woman of God. And so they set up these stones right by the Jordan River, which was the gateway to Israel. Everyone who came in and out of Israel in this part of the country would see these stones, and because the Jordan River was the gateway to the country. By the way, we have an airport here called Gateway Airport. I'm really not sure what it's a gateway to. It could be a gateway to Apache Junction, a gateway to Pinell County. I don't know. But the Jordan River is a true gateway to Israel, and that's where these stones were. Then Matt Hammett said this. He said, I was wondering in my life, what is my stone of remembrance? What in my life will remind me of who I am as a man of God? And he said, I landed on this metaphor, the front door. And so he said, in my life, the front door, every time I walk in or out of it, I'm reminded that I am a person of God and how I am to live to my family and then to the world. I said the Bible has a lot to say about doors. One of the first mentioned of doorways is in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And so open your Bibles there. And let me read to you what God says through Moses to the people of Israel. We have the Hebrew people's sacred Shema. So we'll read that. And then we'll read about doorways. So I'll pick up in verse 5 in Deuteronomy 6. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commands I give you are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road. Then in verse 9 we read, write them on the door frames of your houses, so that every time, his point is every time you walk through the door of your home, then it's written these words of what God means to you. You can't help but see them every time you go in or out of your front door. That's what it says. I have this key idea on the screen, kind of a thought to take home today about where we're heading. Every day we walk through the front door, we are faced with choices, ways to live. The question for all of us is, are we the same person to the world as you are at home? Are you the same person out there as you are in here? Because consistency of character is critical to a life that pleases God. You've maybe heard it said that character is critical as a follower of Jesus Christ. I want to say that maybe even more important is consistency of character. That on both sides of this door, in your home or in your apartment if you room with friends, or in your dorm room or wherever you live, that when you walk out the door, are you the same person to the world? So I have two simple challenges, two simple thoughts that I want to share with you. The first one is this. When you walk out the front door of wherever you live, be the same person out there as you are in here. In here could be in this worship house. In here could be in your home. In here could be in your dorm room if you're a college student. Or in here could be your apartment if you room with a bunch of friends. But the challenge is to be the same person out there as you are in here. Because sometimes we walk through the front doors of the places we live, and we walk out into the world, and people change. And sometimes we live as a different person. We read stories of that. I want to share one with you. Turn forward a few pages in your Bible to 2 Kings. In 2 Kings, we read about a commander of the Syrian army. His name is Naaman. Naaman has leprosy. But he has a Hebrew girl in his house working for him, and she says, there's a man of God named Elisha who can heal you. And so Naaman goes to Elisha. Elisha tells him, wash in the Jordan River, with the Gateway River. He doesn't want to. He says it's a filthy, Jewish river. But finally he agrees, and he's healed. Well, right away he wants to give Elisha all kinds of gifts, silver and brand new clothes. And then we read this. We'll pick up the story in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 16. The prophet Elisha answered, "Surely, as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing from you." And even though Naaman urged him, Elisha refused. Verse 19, after Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, let me pause here in the story. We're now introduced to another character in the story. His name is Gehazi. Gehazi is Elisha's right-hand man. He appears in just about every story that Elisha is in. He's his assistant, personal assistant. He's the vice president. He's right there. But now he sees a moment of opportunity. Here's what he does. He says, my master was too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. And when Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from his chariot and said, is everything all right? Everything is all right, Gehazi answered. But my master sent me to say, so now he's lying. He's stealing and he's lying. 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothes. And then Naaman says, by all means, take 2 talents and piles of clothes. So do you see what happens? He's in the house with a man of God, but he sees some opportunity out there. So he goes out the front door, runs down the road. We read over a hill where he can't be seen, and he becomes a different person. Sometimes we leave the places that we live and we forget who we are. Do you know that's an actual phenomenon? It's just not an idea that I have. It's an actual psychological phenomenon. There's now studies being done, and it's being called the front door effect. And they're finding researchers, and mainly a group of researchers at the University of Notre Dame, led by a Dr. Andrea Tamplin, they found that when you walk through a doorway, it causes forgetfulness. You think I'm just making this up. I'm not. And I was glad I've read this, because I've actually walked out of the doorway of my office, down the hallway into Scott Swanson's office, sat down, and I've gone, man, I came to talk to you about something, but I have absolutely no idea. Has this happened to any of you? Just me? Just anyone else? All right, 2 or 3 honest people in the room. You thought it was old-timers. It's not. It's not. It's actually a phenomenon that happens to us. You ever left your bedroom, walked out, you get to the fridge, you open the door, you don't know. Why am I here? I don't. Get the ice cream anyway. You just take the ice cream anyway. But it's an actual thing that happens. We walk through doorways. They say if you walk in a room, let's say 20 feet, the same room, it doesn't cause forgetfulness. But in that same distance you go through a doorway, you start to forget. I say that because sometimes we walk out the front doors of our homes or our apartments or our dorm rooms, and we forget. We forget that you are a woman of God or you are a man of God, and we start to live differently. I said the issue is consistency of character. I think character, like I said, is important, but consistency of character is maybe even more important. Consistency of character is critical, isn't it, when it comes to issues of friends? Consistency of character, integrity is critical to your job and to your career. It's critical to your family. Closely connected to the idea of consistency of character is to keep your word. Is to be a person of honor and honesty. Is to be a person of virtue. To have consistency of character means that you have integrity. You will never thrive as a person in business and work if you do not have integrity. Your marriage will not thrive if you don't have integrity. Your kids, your friendships will not flourish and thrive if you fail to have integrity. You know, integrity even affects the sports we play. Once in a while, I get to play golf. Golf doesn't work if people are not honest. Now, believe me, I've been pencil whipped plenty times, but usually golf only works if everyone is honest. Even in the PGA, this is a true story I read of recently. There's a PGA pro by the name of Brian Davis. Maybe you've never heard his name before. He's never won a tournament in the PGA, but he's a pretty good golfer. But not long ago, he was in the final round of the Verizon Heritage Tournament in Hilton Head, South Carolina. He gets to the 18th hole. He's down by just one stroke to Jim Furyk. He has a 21-foot putt, and he makes it. And so the tournament goes to a playoff hole, just him and Furyk. Furyk sticks it on the green. His ball bounces over the green, Brian Davis's, and into a marsh. It's a hazard. So he goes up to his ball, he addresses it, and he hits a perfect flop up by the green, and he lands it, and he's looking at a par. And he's like, I'm still in this. But he stood over where he had swung the club because Brian Davis said, I was quite certain I had violated Rule 13.4. Now, most of you know what Rule 13.4 is, right? I had to read about it. Rule 13.4 says that when you're in a hazard, in your backswing, your club cannot touch any loose impediments. It can't touch a blade of grass or a reed or a branch because you can't clear out debris that's in your way on your backswing so you have a better follow through. And so he called the rules official over and he said, I think in my backswing I nicked that reed and it moved. The rules official said, I didn't see anything move. Jim Furyk said, I didn't see anything move. So Brian Davis said, why don't we look at the TV monitors? And they looked at the TV monitors. They didn't see anything move. He said, put it in slow motion. When they played it in slow motion, his club nicked a reed and it moved. And he said, I need you to give me a 2-stroke penalty. And he lost the tournament in that moment. And he lost $400,000. As they're signing their scorecards, Jim Furyk looked at him and he said, why did you do it? What would possess you? You've never won a tournament. Furyk has won over a dozen tournaments. He says, why did you do it? And he said this. He said, because I could not live with myself if I was not honest. And what maybe Furyk didn't know, and what maybe a lot of people don't know about Brian Davis, is that he's a man of God. His father's even a pastor, and he says he was raised in a home where integrity mattered. That the person that he is to the world is the same person that he is before God. And it's like what C.S. Lewis says, he says this, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. If you're writing anything down this morning, write down this thought. Character is doing the godly thing always, no matter what, because that is who you are. Character is doing the godly thing always, no matter what, because that is who you are as a man or woman of God, period. And integrity, like I said before, hinges on the consistency of our actions, the consistency of our character. Because sometimes I think we read the Bible at home. Sometimes we pray at home. Sometimes we even take our kids to church like maybe you have today. And then we walk out the door of our homes and we become a different person. I have a few thoughts just before we move on consistency of character. Here's a few questions about integrity. How do you exhibit integrity in your daily life? What has caused lapses in your integrity? What role does integrity play in your relationships, your friendships, coworkers, with family? At what times have you most needed to exercise integrity? And then the last one I have is, in what ways are you intentionally making integrity a habit? So I said I had 2 challenges for you. The first one is when you walk out the front door, be the same person as out there as you are in here. The second challenge I want to put in front of you is when you walk in the front door, be the same person in here as you are out there. Because sometimes we walk in the front door and our demeanor changes. So let's go back to our story in 2 Kings chapter 5 about Gehazi. So Gehazi, we read, gets an armload of loot from Naaman, who used to be the leper, and he has 2 bars of silver, and he's heading back to his home, and we read this, and I'll pick up in verse 24. When Gehazi came to the hill that he had gone over, he took the things from the servants, the people that were helping them, and then he put them away, or he hid them in the house. So he comes through the door of the house, and he hides all the stuff that he stole. When he had gone in and stood before his master Elisha asked him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" Listen to his answer. Your servant didn't go anywhere. What are you talking about? And that's what he says. How funny is that? He comes back in the house, and now he's a different person. There's this great moment in the life of Daniel, if you want to turn to the minor prophets. Daniel is in Babylonian captivity. There's a king named Belshazzar, and Belshazzar has given an edict that for the next 30 days, no one can worship any god or anyone except him. Well, Daniel's always worshiped the one and true God. So we read this about Daniel, Daniel 6, verse 10. When Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room. So he walks into his house. And then where the windows open toward Jerusalem. So then he walks into his house and he opens up these shutters. And he began to pray 3 times a day. He got down on his knees and prayed before God, giving thanks, just as he had done before. He walks into the doorways of his house, and his life is an open book. He throws the shutters open. If you want to prosecute me for praying in my home, that's who I am, and that's what I'm going to keep doing. I don't know if all of you know that Josh Havens has family in Holland. A lot of his relatives are from Holland. About once a year he goes back, and he tells us stories about Holland. And he was talking about how in Holland, at night, everyone's curtains are open. If you walk the streets of Amsterdam through neighborhoods, everyone lives with their curtains wide open and the lights on. So you can walk the streets and you can see what people are having for dinner. You can see what they're watching on TV. You can see the kids fighting in the living room. You see it all. Nobody closes the curtains. Josh says, because if you close the curtains, people think you have something to hide. The neighbors start to talk about you if you close the shutters and the curtains. They'll say things like, oh, maybe they're hoarders. Maybe they have cats. Maybe something like that is going on in there. Maybe it's a meth lab. Who knows? But they close the curtains. Arizona, everyone closes their shutters and curtains. You close a garage door before the engine is off. That's how we live. But not in Holland. I have a friend tell me about his father, was talking about how his father, who was a pastor, he says, my father, though, when he came home, was a different man. Sometimes we walk through the doors of our house and we become different people. He says his father, when he was working at church, he had all this energy and attention for everyone and time for everyone, but when he came home, he was short with his kids. And he was on edge, and he was worn out, and he was tired, and they got a different person than they had out to the world. And I wonder if that's happening in your life. The challenge, like I said earlier, is to have consistency of character. I have kind of a list, kind of a comparison and contrast, just so you see what I'm talking about. But because sometimes out there, you're a paid professional, and you act like it. And then you come in here. And in here, it could be in your apartment with friends. It could be in your dorm room with your roommate. It could be in your home. You're agitated. Out there, you're patient. In here, you're impatient. Out there, you're gracious and kind, but in here, you're short with the people you love the most. Out there, you compliment and you praise your coworkers, but in here, you're critical and you complain a lot. Out there, you're a leader and people respect that and you take initiative, but sometimes in here, with the people who matter most, you're apathetic and disinterested. Out there, a lot of times we give our best, but then in here, the people we care about more than anyone else get the worst of us. I have 2 friends named Matt Hammett. One is here today. My other friend, Matt Hammett, lives in San Diego. He's the pastor of Flood Church. And we were talking about days off years ago, and he told me he takes Fridays off. I started to take Fridays off instead of Mondays. I said, Matt, most pastors take Mondays off. Why don't you take Mondays off? He said, because on Monday, after the 4 services that I do on Sunday, he says, I'm exhausted. I'm worn out. He said, I don't want to give my family my worst day of the week. And so I save Friday for my day off when it's my best day of the week. Because you see what he's saying? Sometimes we're tempted to just give the people we love the most our leftovers. I sometimes watch people who are well known as Christians, but they're also public figures. I wonder, what are they like at home? I loved hearing Kurt Warner talk about what he's like at home. Kurt Warner, we had him here. He's helped a couple of times with the football camps we've done for kids. And the last time he was here, we had about 300 or 400 kids, and he was talking about his own family. He has 7 kids. I have a picture of him here. All 7 are on his back right here. And Kurt Warner said that when he's at home, he tries to be completely 100% there for his family. And I think he lives it. I really believe that. And Kurt was talking about, he said not long ago, he was at home with his kids. It was hot. It was the summer, and they were in the pool. So he yelled at one of his sons. He said, "Hey, go grab a football." So guy comes back. One of his sons come back. He's throwing the football in the swimming pool. After about 4 or 5 passes, he looks at it, and the football that he's throwing, it's soaking wet. It says, Super Bowl XXX IV MVP, most valuable player, record 414 passing yards. It's like, I can't believe he grabbed my game ball from the one Super Bowl. I said, all right. He said, go back out. He said, we just kept throwing the same football. And he said this, because my kids matter a lot more than a football. And that's how he lives. And so just in your own life, can I just say, give the people you love the best that you have. Be the same person when you walk through the door on the inside as you are to everybody else. Like Matt Hammett, come on up. Matt, this nugget of this door being the reminder for us, I said it came from Matt. And so, Matt, this is something you've lived. Matt travels the country a lot, playing all over, just like Josh does. You said you played with Sanctus Real. How many shows a year?
Well, over the last 12 years I was with the band, it was anywhere between 120 and 150 shows a year.
150
Plus
shows.
days in the studio and travel days. So
I got to know Matt. I got to travel with Matt and his band, Sanctus Real, in the afters to about 25 cities and speak on their tour. And then Matt did our man camp, and our men loved hearing your heart as you started this ministry, Lead Me Live. But Matt, how has this issue of being the same person to your family as you are before thousands of people, how have you found that a challenge to live?
Yeah, I really struggled with that. And that was a question that I didn't feel like I could answer. Everybody say, how do you find balance? I felt like my life was a big teeter-totter. It was like at home, out on the road, and people would say, how do you deal with that? And I would say, I don't know. I can't figure it out, how to deal with that. That restlessness continued to grow inside me, especially after I wrote the song we're going to talk about in a second. As I was singing about my desire to be a father and a husband that is after God's heart and after my wife's heart and my kids, and thinking, man, I'm out here, how am I leading my family well? Well, I'm out here on the road doing this. I don't know. And then I knew it was time to make a big decision about how I live my life.
I've heard you talk about, and we've talked about how you walked into your home one day after being on the road, and your wife said, we need to sit down.
Yeah, yes. She might have used my first, middle, and last name. And there somewhere, I knew it was serious, let's put it that way. And she looked me in the eyes with tears, and it broke my heart because what I heard come out of her mouth, I knew it was true. She said, I need you to be more emotionally present, more spiritually strong for me. And that day, as she just poured her heart out, as she cried, my heart broke because I was like, man, I see this woman in front of me who is completely broken right now. A piece of her life is fractured. And I knew that somehow that was my fault. But I wasn't sure. I was like, okay, I'm not sure how to fix this, what to do. But the thing about it was, after our conversation, she got up, she left, and then I picked up my guitar, and actually I started pouring what she had spoke to me into this song that I wrote that day. And then, it really became my prayer. She said, lead me. That became my prayer as well. But the one thing I never forget is looking at the table next to me where our wedding photo was, seeing her glowing face in that photo. It wasn't because her hair and makeup was perfect. It was because she had a countenance of a woman who was full of hope and expectations for what life would look like with the man of her dreams. Yeah, right? And so, she didn't know all the failures of mine she'd have to deal with along the way of me not knowing how to lead her well. And I was just like, Lord, you know what? I see the contrast of the woman I married on that day and where she is 7 years later. Lord, help me because I want to regain the footing that I've lost here as the leader of my home.
Yeah. And now, if I remember right, you said you sat down at your kitchen table and you didn't get up until you had written the lyrics to the song Lead
Yeah,
Me.
absolutely. Wrote the first draft of Lead Me, and later on I went with a good buddy of mine, Jason Ingram, and put a little bow tie on it, but man, I had that first draft of Lead Me done that very day. Yeah.
And then you talk about how sometimes we have the best of intentions. Even that day, you have the best intentions.
Yep.
But intentions only take us so far.
Yeah, so the big takeaway for me that I still like to give to the guys who come to Lead Me Live conferences or Man Camp is that good intentions are absolutely worthless. Worthless. Because we can live a reality in our head. Do you know we can actually believe that we're somebody we're not because we have intentions of who we want to be in our minds? Like we see ourselves like we love our kids. We imagine ourselves loving them in a certain way. We imagine ourselves leading our wives. We think about our intentions to do it. We can almost believe sometimes that that's who we are, when on the outside, the people we love, in fact, are not seeing what's in here. And so I realized that good intentions are absolutely worthless until they become actions based in the reality of what our loved ones really need from us. And that was the big takeaway for me. My start that day of my journey from being a man of good intentions to a man of action as the spiritual leader in my home.
And then take us back to this metaphor that you've landed on. You talk about the book of Joshua and how he set up these stones of remembrance and how that caused you to create your own.
Yeah. You know, the story of Joshua, everybody knows the highlight reel of Joshua where he's up, in front of all the Israelites. He reminds them of God's faithfulness. He basically goes through a lot of the early Old Testament and what God did for the Israelites and reminds them of all these amazing things that God has done. And then Joshua makes this declaration, as for me and my house, you guys know it? You got it. Everybody knows it. But see, that's usually where it ends for us. We usually hear that. But actually, that's not where it ends. As God was laying messages on my heart to share with guys out of this story, this was one of them, because as I read it, I realized that after Joshua, in front of all of Israel, makes this proclamation, that all of Israel rises up in this kind of epic moment. And they're like, we will serve the Lord too. Everybody is there with him. And you would imagine like this is the closing movie scene, right? Like just an army of men, up there like cheering, we're going to serve the Lord. But what Joshua actually says to them is he says, you can't, because I've seen the way you live. And I just think that's the biggest buzzkill ever. It's like, wait a minute, what did he say? You can't, because I've seen the way you live. He says it'd be better for you to say you wouldn't serve the Lord, go on the way you are, than to say you would and not live it out. And so that was a huge challenge to me. And so what he actually does is, okay, you want to serve the Lord? We do stones of remembrance here. He built this basically like a altar in the middle of the town, monument in the middle of the town, where people could see that this is where you stood when you said you were going to serve the Lord. And every time you look at that, you're going to remember what you said here and whether or not you're really living it out the way you said you would. And I thought, man, wouldn't that be awesome if we had something in our lives we could look at and remember every time we see it, who are we? Who did we say we would be? Not just intentions, but actions. And to me, I realized we all have a front door that sees who we are as we walk out and who we are as we come in. In a metaphorical sense, it sees both sides of the way that we live. And I encourage guys, every time you look at that door, you remember, man, I said at church or wherever it was, I made a proclamation that I would serve the Lord, and I've got to live up to that and be a man of action, just like I said I would be.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, now, and you said you would share the song Lead Me with us that kind of led to this whole journey with you. Would you do that?
Absolutely, yes.